as well.
Mike,
Yes?
what happens if, as we roll from the fourth class to third class, and we just continue to, whatever we've got set up under that, if we did?
So, and we do, we'll get to that later, but
Okay.
in our budget, we do expend funds to search and rescue, for instance. And so at the time that we will convert from a fourth class to a third class county, we can no longer use transit room tax funds to subsidize those funds at this time. However, the legislature this last session implemented a hold on the county class situation. As I understand it, that's to be held until such time as the results of the next census are available to make the actual determinations what the county, what they actually are. And in my position, and I've held this, I've talked to the lieutenant governor and so forth, is because Wasatch County, about half of the homes in Wasatch County are second homes, that doesn't necessarily translate to population. And a big component in the formulas that are used are building permits. And so if half of our building permits are not residences that actually have people that live here full-time residences, then it shouldn't be used to determine what the population of the county is, because that's an unrealistic expectation. Us, Summit County and Washington County, all three of us have very high secondary home numbers, and so it was felt that these numbers were skewed, that the lieutenant governor's using. So they felt this was the safest thing to do. Let's wait for the actual census, then we actually count the people that are here and make an accurate determination. We will likely be a third-class county. If we aren't yet, we probably will be by the time that is done.
Yeah.
So we'll know for sure.
Okay.
That was kind of the.
But any funds we're spending in that area, if we move, then
We won't be able to do that any longer.
we'll have to adjust it, yeah.
Continuing in Title 17 of the state code, except as provided in subsection 4, a county may not expend more than 1/3 of the revenues generated by the transit room tax provided in section 5912.301 for any combination of the following purposes. So we'll get into it in a moment, but basically what it's saying is this money you collect under this guideline, you can't use more than 1/3 of it under a certain classification. So 2/3 of it can go to one, 1/3 can go to another.
And those classifications were the ones we looked at before in the past page.
Well, we'll break it down a little bit further when I get to the next slide. The original tax that was allowed was 3%. Then in October, if on or after October 1st, 2006, a county legislative body imposes a tax or increases the rate of a tax in accordance with section 5912.301 at a rate that exceeds 3%, so we already had 3%, but the county legislative body may expend revenues generated by anything above that 3% for the purposes described in subsections 1 through 3, and is not subject to any limits on the amounts of revenues that may be expended for a purpose described in subsection 2. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and hopefully I can clear all of that up. So I'm going to use the numbers here. I've inserted the current numbers. I gave this presentation a year ago. I've updated the numbers, so the biggest fear I have when you update something is that I left something from the previous presentation in there. So I hope I haven't, and I hope the math's correct. So the total amount budgeted for 2018 budget, and that's the last year's, the complete year that we have numbers for. We budgeted that we would receive from, that's a portion of the state of Utah to give it back to us, $1,956,100. So this is based on a total transit room tax of 4.25% on the room rate. 3% plus 1.25%. And I say that way because we want to break it down. And of the 3%, we learned that 2/3 or 1/3 could not, more than 1/3 could not be spent on a certain area, and 2/3 had to be spent in another area. So I break it down to 2%, 1%, and 1.25%. So the 2% component must be used for establishing and promoting recreation, tourism, film production, and conventions. The 2% component budgeted, the total amount for 2018 is $919,367. Now show the math there. Basically, you've got 4.25%, so the 2% of 4.25 is the 0.47 times the total amount. And then the remaining components, which are the 1 and 1.25%, may be used for any of the permitted uses in the code. And that amount would be the 0.53 times 1,956,100 is $1,036,733. So we have those two figures. They're distinct, they're separate, and we track them separately. And if any of you saw, we did there was a legislative audit that went out a while ago, and our county was one of 7 counties that was picked to audit. And we went through those things, and we were separating those funds, and we were not spending those funds, and that was stated in the audit. There were 2 counties that didn't pass the audit. They were using these funds for an airport, for their airports. And if you look through that list, airports were not part of that list. In their minds, airports were an extension of tourism because it was bringing tourism, but they were specifically allowed by state code. So this is how we broke down the budget for 2018. On the 2% component, which is to go to tourism, we have the recreation component that went to the Park and Rec of $186,000. We had the tourism, which goes to Ryan's group of $618,560 for a total of $804,560. So if you remember back on the previous slide, we had $919,367 available for that. We budgeted $804,560, so we had a surplus of $114,807. That goes into, that remains as a fund balance in the fund. It doesn't go away. It collects, it builds, and so that fund balance is still there for tourism. That $114,000 is still in the fund. And so if Ryan has a specific project, for instance, and comes to the council and says, I've got this opportunity to do this, and we have money in that account then to cover. We actually have more than $114,000, but we have a fund balance.
That's just for 1 year, and it's probably
That's just 1 year.
Yeah.
And that, I think we've got about $360,000 or so in that fund balance at this time that's available.
But do we have a deadline associated with that? So do we have 5 years to spend?
No.
Or we have to,
No, there's not a deadline, and there's not a limit on the reserve. So code doesn't, like for taxes, we have limits, 50% of our budget or something to that effect. There isn't a limit on this, so we can't collect that money and save up for a big project or something we want to do in the future. On the remaining component of the transient tax, which is the 1% component and the 1.25% component, we had Recreation Fund 39 at $375,000, Recreation Fund 32, which is the bond on the rec center, at $450,000, and we had Recreation Equipment budget at $132,000. Utah Pioneer Museum budgeted at $3,000, Search and Rescue budgeted at $60,000 for a total of $1,020,000, with an unappropriated surplus of $16,733.
Can you tell me what Fund 39 is?
Fund 39 is the capital projects fund, and in capital projects we have several things that we have done. We've done the ball diamonds out of Fund 39. We have corridor preservation for the bypass road is in Fund 39. Those monies are in there as well. So any capital for our future admin building that we want to build, we have money in there that we want to build, so that at some point, if we want to, when we want to build a new building, we'll have money put away to do that. So and that fund carries over from year to year. It doesn't. It's the general fund. All those budgets go away at the end of the year, and you carry the fund balance over, but the budgets go away. This one, the budgets don't go away. This one, the budgets remain in the fund.
Mike, is the TRT the only source of revenue for Fund 39?
It is not. We have corridor preservation funds going into that as well, and most of the money in that fund at this time is corridor preservation. No. So we have very little at this time. Likely by the time we finish the budgets up that's one place where when we have unappropriated surpluses, we can put them in for future projects. So we list the future projects, and we can collect the money over time, and we can park the money in there. And it doesn't go against our total on our Fund 10 budget, 50% allowance. So where we're a $22 million Fund 10 budget, we can have $11 million in appropriate surplus. So if we have $12 million, we can put $1 million in here, and then keep that carryover assigned to a project. And so that's that process that we go through to do that.
Mike, is this unappropriated surplus combined with the one from the 2%?
No, they're still
Two
distinct, separate.
Have to keep separate.
They're separate, and we have to keep them that way. Now, I will state that on this component, this 1 1/4%, that money can be used as well for tourism. The other way isn't allowed. The tourism money cannot be used for these types of projects. But this money can be used for that. So when we have unappropriated surplus in that fund, that money can also be used for strictly tourism component. And these are some of the things that we have talked about over time that we wanted to perhaps save money for in that unappropriated component. We have a bond that we're paying off that's about $7 million on the rec center and fairgrounds that we have been paying mostly out of Fund 10 until we started to build up some fund balance in the transient room tax. And now we're switching over to try and pay for some of that out of the transient room fund. And so that saves on our Fund 10 balance, so we're using those monies then to help for funding the sheriff's office and other things. You have to keep these monies in their own monies. They can't get out of their own monies. We have some balance due on our Hicken land purchase, which is land down by the fairground. Search and rescue funding, we've been looking at, we've been funding snowmobile purchase for some of the individuals involved in that. We've been funding, we just did discuss and allowed for a commander position for search and rescue. And we've also looked at some other expenses that can be funded through this search and rescue fund. So about $85,000 is what we're looking at. EMS can be funded out of this. And one of the things that we had talked about for both EMS and search and rescue is we likely have a significant need for a mobile command center. What we have now are some old trailers that we got from, they're called FEMA trailers. They came out of New Orleans at the time of the flood. And at the end, when everything was done, the federal government had these trailers and said, well, if anybody wants them, come get them. We got a couple. And so, you know, we fix it up, we have radios and other things in them, but they're very limited. They're just camp trailers that have been converted to do what we're doing, and they're really not efficient enough for what our needs are when we have wildfires, when we have big searches or emergency situations. So we're looking at the possibility of needing to buy a mobile command center. That could be paid for out of these funds. And that mobile command center could be anywhere from $200,000 to $900,000, depending on what we end up with. And the sheriff and Jeremy Hales right now are looking at what's available and what things are out there so that we can be prepared. And that's the whole idea of some of these items, is we have these things in place prepared so when we do have an emergency, we have everything in place to just continue on doing. If we lose power in our in the jail and dispatch and things, we can move dispatch capabilities into the other search and rescue building, and we can move some of those capabilities into a mobile command center. So it broadens our capability in emergency services. We've talked about a new convention center. At some time, that may become something we do. It's been talked about, you know, and that could be a $4 to $10 million facility, depending on what people have talked about in the past. It's not imminent, but it's something that can be done. And other recreational facilities. We've been talking, as we've worked on the advisory board for the Park and Rec District, we've been coming up with projects that we're looking at, and many of those projects will be paid for out of transient room tax. They qualify, and they fit in what we are doing with that. So the pickleball courts are mainly going to be paid for by the municipality's participation and our impact fees. But other things that we do, and we're putting lists together now of what we want to expand those facilities, that can be paid for by this. And why that's significant, why the recreation component is significant, is that was the part of the original idea of if we can do things that bring tourism in, and Tom brings a lot of tourism in with the facilities. Just on the 4th of July for the ball diamonds, Tom, what's your numbers on that?
248 teams.
248 teams. And each team, each kid on the team brings a family. They all eat at the restaurants, they stay in our rooms, it's a great thing. We bring people into the rec center, we bring people into the rodeo. It's a component of what Ryan does. And Ryan brings people in with events that are not necessarily recreation events, but he brings in other events that then do the same thing. And so this money is promoting those types of things, but it's also providing opportunity for our residents to use these facilities. We get to use the pickleball courts too. Not only we get to use the ball diamonds, we get to use the soccer fields. And so that got into this dual use idea. Now, if I can switch for just a moment to what actually happened. That was the budget. So let's look at what actually happened last year, 2018. We make our best guesses. So as we look at this, we can see.
It's really blurry.
Yeah, you can't read it.
There,
Right there.
there it is, that's
Is
good.
that better?
Yes.
I just thought it was my eyes. You can see the third column over where it has the number totals. You can see where we budgeted for $1,956,100. What we actually brought in to go down to the bottom of that line was $2,111,100. So we brought in more money than we had anticipated we would bring in. When Barry and I look at this, we want to be careful. I've done this long enough, for enough years, that I know that transient room tax hasn't been consistent every year. And not only is it not consistent, it depends a little bit on when the hotels or entities report or pay their money to the state. And so in December, if they don't make a payment in December and it carries to January, it could go into the next year and we could be short. Or they could pay early in January off of December numbers, and then in the next year it inflates the numbers. So we try to be very careful and very conservative in our estimates of this. We weren't too far off. I mean, that's a lot of money, but in percentages we were 11% different, which isn't horrible. And so usually when we budget, we take the previous year's dollars and budget for previous year's dollars, even though we know there's probably going to be some growth in there, and it's probably going to be higher the next year. We did have some years where it went down. In the 2008, 2011 era, it did go down. And so we want to be careful with that, particularly where we're trying to budget. With tourism, we have wages and other things associated with it. Projects, it isn't such a big problem because we just hold off on the project if you don't have any money. But when we have people employed and contracts to pay for advertising and so forth, we want to make sure we have the money available. And so we're a little bit conservative on that. And so we took in the $2,111,000. Let's look at where we ended up here as we went through the year. And so the marketing, that would be Ryan's group. And so Ryan, along with his advisory board, they put together a budget. And then they present that budget to us. That their group approves it, they present it to us, we approve it, and then we say, okay, we're just going to give you that amount of money over the year. We give it monthly because we do their payroll and so forth. And so every month we give them money and they keep track of it that way. We don't account for how they spend it. Exactly. We account for what we give them in the budget. So for last year, we budgeted $618,560.32. What they actually spent was $587,367.79. So they didn't spend everything. They did spend $31,000 plus dollars. Moving down, under professional and technical, we had $35,000 budgeted. We spent $25,000. And that went towards the junior high school rodeo. We had $5,000 there. And for rodeo equipment, we had $20,000 budgeted. So we spent the $25,000. We didn't spend $35,000. The next item is for the FFA. We had $132,000 budgeted. We spent $57,260. And that was more equipment. That was the show ring and those other things. We brought all of this to the council at the time and discussed these purchases and where this money went. One further down, Fund 39, which is our capital projects fund, we budgeted $375,000. We didn't spend any. So we didn't spend any money on capital projects last year out of this fund. In transfer to search and rescue, which is we've used the word derby, but it's equivalent to what we used to do out of the demolition derby, was $60,000. We transferred to $60,000. And then Fund 32, which is our debt service fund, that would be the rec center bond, and it's about a $7 million remaining bond, and we budgeted $450,000, and we spent $450,000. The next one, our Fund 11, is where it changed a little bit. We had budgeted $151,000, and that we budgeted about that amount that's used for promotions and advertising for recreation opportunities like the ball diamond, the firecracker event that Tom holds, the rodeo, and this is mainly advertising outside of our area and promoting these activities. But at the end of the last year, we had some things that came up that we needed to cover. One of them was the roof on the rec center. And we had leaks in the roof. Tom went out and got bids, and that was a $406,000 expense. We own the building. The county owns the building, even though he runs it. And so because we had an unappropriated surplus in the transient room tax fund, we had the money. And so we paid the $406,000 for replacement of the roof. In addition to that, Tom had to replace a pump, an irrigation pump. It was $90,000. And then there was some miscellaneous things in the rec department of $251,000. And so that added up to $899,000. We had that money in that fund because we had saved some of those unappropriated surpluses, and then we were able to pay those bills. They weren't budgeted when we did the original budget, but by the end of the year, when we needed the funds, they were there. And I think everything worked out, Tom, didn't it?
Absolutely.
And so it worked out to be a good thing for them. So moving further down,
So that put us in deficit.
well, it was a deficit for what we budgeted. We had an unappropriated surplus in the fund, so we had enough money in the fund, but it was more money than we brought in for 2018. So it took some of this, it took the reserve, some people call it the reserve, so it took the reserve down.
It didn't carry as a deficit into the next year.
No.
And to address the issue of capital improvements, we created the Parks and Rec Advisory Board to come up with a plan for paying for these improvements so we're not hit with a big bill like this that we hadn't anticipated. So that's why we created the advisory board and why we're going through that way.
Okay, so for last year, this on the screen is everything we spent out of the transient room tax fund. There isn't anything that was done that's not shown on this sheet. Okay. I think all of you received this sheet. This particular one is by month. This particular one is the transient room tax. There are several sheets on this. There's sales tax, 2 sheets for sales tax, transient room tax, and restaurant tax. And so Where the difference is, if you look at the 2018 year-to-date, during the year of 2018, we took in $2,293,000. The reason it's off is because we don't get reimbursed for 3 months. But our budgets are strictly calendar. So we're picking up the last 3 months of the previous year, and we're missing the final 3 months at the end of the year. So those numbers don't match. They never will. But this is you receive this report each month. Barry puts it together so you can track where those transfer tax fees are. And you can see as you go across from 2016 over, we were hanging out at the 1.8 million. We bumped up to 2.2 million. Like I say, until you get a history of where we are, it's hard to say that next year we'll be at 2.3 million or whatever. You kind of have to watch these trends because it's all associated with numbers of visits to the county, and that can go up and down. And as we get more hotels online, now we've got the hotel that's being constructed right now off the Browns Canyon intersection. This number will go up significantly. And as it does, those percentages remain the same, but the dollars increase because of the percentages. So Ryan's budget is going to increase significantly as that happens and these hotels happen, because he'll have to market for those hotels and the other activities that are associated with it. And so all this grows together, so to speak. And so I hope this explains to you where we are with transient impacts. Any questions that I can answer?
Anything else from Mike on this, council?